Today is Tes. Was this used for the frame last night? We're just going to record on this microphone today.
I can't use this?
Yeah, the battery didn't last. I don't know.
I saw a lighter.
No, this one.
There's no battery?
Yeah, this one. But we can record it on this. It'll be the same.
This also records in a way that it can go onto the internet?
Yeah, just the same. Okay.
Okay.
Today is Tes Zion and Tashin Samech Tes, Elul, Tes Zion of the Elul, and we are learning Samech Tes, Daf Gimel.
Alright, so we saw in the Pirush of the Pasuk Vayeshev Hashem Melech LeElul that in order there should be the Madrigo, the Inyan of Melech LeElul, that the Eivah should become a Melech over a Olam Nivra. That's one on the Olam is Meloshen Helem, but that beweist that the Inyan of the Helem Abira Miya Nivra. In order that should be, then there had to be Vayeshev Havaya. That the Madriga of the Shem Havaya had to go into a Inyan of Yeshiva. Shuhu b'chinas achoraim b'chitzenias. Sort of the beer bezeh is that when a man sits down and koi mosai, his full koima is nishpelas lamata. That's not recognizable. The shleimus of his stature, as you might say, becomes hidden and nishpal and cast down. What that's indicatory of the Inyan of achoraim v'chitzenias. But achoraim means like the rear side of something, not the pnimius, the opposite of the concept of pnimius. And chitzenius means a door which is only for the sake of a gilui michutz laha'etzem. Well, that's the inyan of chitzenius. The inyan bechinas achoraim l'maila hu inyan bechinas ha'ora de ha'ora, what we've been describing in length up to now. So that's in ha'ora gufe, in the concept of a luminescence and a reflection bilvad, it's only a ha'ora of a ha'ora. She'ena memahus ha'er ha'kodum. Or kodum, it's not from the same mahus of the er ha'kodum. But that's what we saw the whole concept of the parsa. So we saw the relationship of the reimamus of Malchus to the inyan parsa. And so therefore we saw that the diuk is einel memahus or hakodom or koidom, we have to say that that's been a get to the gila of the oil. In other words, that in every Inyan there's also machias and mahus. So in the gila of the oil there's also a mahus. Because we can't say that it's not mamish mahus ha'er hakoidom. Because it is. It's all the same oil. It's all the same iskalas. And the whole Inyan of the Parsa, and I feel the Reimamus of Malchus in Yonim is only to be Mailim, to be master, to be Metzamtzim, the Inyan of the Gilui, of the of the Etzem HaOyer is really the same, it's the same oil, Kamuvan. It's not a which is a Shinui, Gabi the previous be'etzem. So therefore when he says that it's einam memahus ha'er ha'koidem, then we mean in the Inyan of oyer how its Inyan is giloi. We say Inyan sora mamores. So that's what we see, that the Inyan of Malchus, how its whole Inyan is only the Inyan from Chitzenius v'achorayim, but that expresses itself in the passage of the Torah, whereby the Torah states how the Eivah actually brought about the world, Pashtas, but that's the Inyan of the Sora Mamara. What happens? Somebody turned off the air conditioner, all of a sudden it's very sort of stuffy in here. It's not working before. Because either we have to open the windows or we have to have the air conditioner. We can't just sit in a state like that. I mean, is it working or isn't it? Yeah. So we saw that the Inyan of the Asara Mamoris, that's the 10 statements to which the Eibishter brought about the world, and that's at the beginning of the Seder of the creation. That's described in the Shesha Shemay braces, because there's no jokes right now, alright? It's the Shesha Shemay braces express the union of the 10 statements, the Asara Mamoris, which begins with Yehi Oer, and then it goes on Yehi Rakia, with the whole the statement of the whole Asara Mamoris, the 10 statements what the Avishta stated. So we see that that's Yehi Oer, Yehi Rakia. The Avishta said, let there be light, and there was light, or let there be. Yehi means let it be, as you might say in English. Well, that's Kemoi Pekudas Hamelech Hayeshev Al Kiseh Hamalucha, Shehu B'chinas Achorayim V'chitenias Levad. In other words, that the king, the way he runs the actual Medina, and the difference, of course, between the Inyan of Malchus how it is here Lamata and the Inyan of Malchus Lamaila, is that the king doesn't actually hear Lamata, the king doesn't actually bring into creation his subject. I mean, they're tluyim in him, they're dependent in him, betlus kedela ma'id, in the original Inyan of Malchus. It's one on the old complaint of the Chassidim in the modern generations, what they say, there's no more kingships anymore, so there's no real way of observing the Moshel of Malucha, how it was the Pam, the historian, is of Al Chaponim. We see that the way the king functions is that he gives out decrees. Well, those decrees are just a kitzur, let there be this, and that's it. It has to be that way, ein manos, it has to be dafke even kozer. But the actual statement is only just a brief dibur from the Melech, which goes out in an oven that doesn't really express the mahus of the Melech. Klal doesn't tell you anything about him. All it tells you is that he's running the whole country, and the far what he says goes, and oivei and ochavei, he will be oive pekudasa Melech. But the etzem pekuda, the etzem order given by the king, is only a from the Achorayim v'chitenias bilvad. It doesn't really tell us anything cloud about the Mahusa, the king, or the Pnimiyusay, or what is the Pnimiyus Kavona, and why he's saying that, or as the old expression in Yiddish has it, mit them, what does he really want, and what's the ultimate purpose for Chulu. All you get is just a statement, and therefore it's a similar India that is often brought in citizenship, but again, it's a door. The same thing is the inner from a tzava, when people are when the chayolim abshutim in a army, that's the way they also makabel their orders. And yehi kach, it has to be that way. That's why you got to do it. And in the action pekuda is not miskala, the whole reason why you have to move that way. What is the purpose? Or what is the ultimate plan and strategy behind the pekuda? The pekuda is given as a almost shapeless statement that has to be carried out b'chol oifen. And if the Asara Mamoris are written exactly that way in the Torah. Vayema Elokim Yehia, there had to be light, and there's going to be light v'sehoseh. In the indicatory of the Inyan of a Pekuda, what that's a Inyan of an Achorayim v'chitzeni is, Lagabi Aleph, Lagabi the Etzem Mitzaveh, whoever's giving the Tzivui, doesn't really tell you anything about Mehusei HaPinimiyas, and zweitens is, it doesn't tell us what is the Kavana, what is the Pinimiyas, even the Etzem Pekuda Atzmei. It's just a statement. But there are Pekuda Bilvad, well, that's indicatory of Achorayim v'chitzeni, and that's only after the Melech has already Yeshev Al Kisei, after there's already been the coronation and the exception of the Melech with the whole Arichas, Ainin, and he's already Yeshev Al Kisei Malchusei Purus, he's already letting himself down into the day-to-day necessities of the Medina. Well, then he gives forth those Pekudas. Remember, those are the Iranian of the Asara Mamoris, with their Kaviyach, after the Eivisha was already Yeshev Avaya, Melech Leilam, after the Yerid of Tzimtzum, for the sake of the Eilamas, then what was actually Yetzer Lepoyo was a Inyan for Pekuda, a order from the king. Well, that's the Inyan of Chitenius for Achorayim, Haora di Haora Bilvat. Makim Acha in the Sograim, the Rebbe says, Makim Acha Mavur de Latzeder Isalas HaElemes Gama Am Shoches Be'es Asfiras Da Atzilas Bebchinas Ishtaushus Asfiras Zeh Mizeh Einon Bechinas Ilava Olo Mamish וכמי שכוסף בדיבור המסחר וכל העם רואים רי סמך ה' that דיבור המסחר כל העם רואים רי סמך ה' is really only the beginning of that. That's the famous what's called the Shvuas Hemshech of רי סמך ה'. That's one of the famous Hemshechim in Chassidus Chabad just before Samech Tes, so it was already what you might call things were warming up. It was getting into that type of shape that would eventually come out in the Hemshech of Samech Tes. So over there's a famous the Hemshech of the summer in Samech Tes, which is the Hemshech HaShvuas. So it goes as several Maimorim. But the derech of the Rebbe Rashab, when he refers to a Hemshech, he usually refers to it only by the beginning Maimah. Just like, for example, Ayin Beis, which is a huge number of Maimorim, he always calls it B'shah Shehikdimu Tov Reish Ayin Beis. In other words, that's the first Maimah. So the whole Drush is called, it's all called like Drush Echad, B'shah Shehikdimu. After Pishi Yesh hundreds of Maimorim, something like 140 Maimorim, the Hemshech, from Ayin Beis, 144. Maimorim in the Hemshech and Ayin Beis. And the same here, when the Rebbe says Kol Ha'am Roim, that's only the first Maimah in the Hemshech. But this point that he makes here is really right up near the end of the, near the end of the Hemshech. If you weren't informed a little bit, then you might start looking in that Maimah, Kol Ha'am Roim, you might break your head and your eyes might somewhat roll out of your head to find where is the reference to the city, because it's right over at the end of the Hemshech, after several other Maimorim with several other Diburei HaMaschil. But that's the derech of the Rebbe that he refers to a Drush B'Eivin Kozeh. Therefore, if we look up over there in that Hemshech of Kol Ha'am Roim, not in the Maimah Kol Ha'am Roim, then it's Mavur over there, and that's Behektim. We have to spend a couple of minutes talking about this scene because it's a very deep in. But suffice it to say that the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, in Igeros HaKodesh, in the famous Igeros HaKodesh chapter 20, which starts off here, Chayeh Chad Aviyo Gamaya Chad. Well, it's one on that's kilo, the cream of the whole of Igeros HaKodesh, and in some ways it's like the cream of the whole Tanya in a way. It's really tremendously powerful and very, very deeply mystifying. כן, מה אני יכול לעזור לך?
שנייה אחת, זה בחור פה שאני צריך? אסרו לי כמקי, שנייה, ממש שנייה, אני פשוט נוסע מקריית מלאכי.
זה מוכרח להיות באמצע הלימודים? אי אפשר.
אני מקריית מלאכי ואני צריך לנסוע דחוף. מילה אחת.
Is it for you? So the Alter Rebbe over there, it's well known that the Alter Rebbe wrote that famous Igeros, that Iyuv Chayeh Chad chapter 20. Well, it's one that Kof. It's called Igeros HaKodesh Simon Kof. Kof is the first letter of Keser, Kiyadua. Is the Alter Rebbe wrote that a few hours before his Istalchus from the world. He wrote it inside the house of the Goy where he took refuge together with the Samech Tes, together in the famous passage in history when the Rebbe fled from Napoleon. And he was already ill. He got a terrible chill on the way in snow. And they had to go into this Goyish village and the Goy put him in a small house. That's where the Alter Rebbe was, that's where he was Mustalik Min Oilam. So the Rebbe, the Samech Tes was with him. The Mittler Rebbe was in another place at that time. The Mittler Rebbe wasn't actually there at that time. And that's where the Alter Rebbe on Motzei Shabbos, Parsha Shmoi, so that's where he was Mustalik. That's when he passed away. What looks to be the Istalchus from Meir HaOlam is some hours before that. either on the Erev Shabbos or on the Thursday night, the Alter Rebbe wrote this famous piece, the Iyov Chayev Chad, that chapter 20. So it's like, how would you call it, the Madura Basra of the Alter Rebbe. Very famous piece. Very difficult to understand. And one of the big mashpiyim in Lubavitch, when the Rebbe founded the yeshiva, the foundation of Tomchei Tmimim. When the Rebbe founded Tomchei Tmimim, one of the great mashpiyim was called Reb Shmuel Gronim Esterman, was his name. Gronim, he was called. He was a big gewaldige masculine, so there's a tremendous masculine in Siddhis Chabad. And he used to learn that Igeras HaKodesh chapter 20 every week. There was I say all the days of his life he kept learning it, and he said every time he learned it, it appeared to him that he'd already understood the Gavi the previous time, but then when he thought about it a bit, he realized he hadn't understood it probably yet, so he kept learning it the whole of his life every week to try and cover the problems that had come up in the meantime. So that's so here we us the little modest beings trying to say that we do understand something which is written over. Oh, anyway, what state over there at the beginning, the Alter Rebbe says over there that the Sfiros in Atzilas, he brings up B'Shem HaRamak, the Rabbeinu Moshe Karavira. The embassy is it needs a big pupil, even just what he means over there. As a state that the Sfiros in Atzilas, the Esser Sfiros, are interrelated, and they are hamshocha one to the other as Esser Sfiros. And the ashpor from the Sfiros one to the other is b'derech Elul v'Olol. This state to it. However, the mashmois, if you go further in the whole mashmois over there, even though it's not written open like it is in Samech Tes, but the mashmois over there is that when it comes to the actual ashpor into biyah from Atzilas, then it goes with another inyan altogether, and that's the inyan of Malchus. That's the pu'ula. Malchus causes this whole helem of everything that was there before, all the giluim prior to, including the giluim and Atzilas, all become nelem, and it goes off this ha'ora de ha'ora, which is for the sake of the bria yesh me'ana we've learned here by Riches. So what the point over there is in Samech Tes, that what the Alter Rebbe says, that the Sfiros relate one to the other in Atzilas, but derech Elul v'Olol. He says over there that means only for the sake of the Amshocha b'toich Olam Atzilas itself. In other words, for the sake of the interrelationship of the Sfiros in Atzilas, then they interrelate and they react or mashpia between themselves, even for Elul v'Olol in the way we've described Elul v'Olol Tzamei. However, when it comes to the ashpor from Olam Atzilas into Olam Bria Yetzira V'Asiyah, what they already in V'yesh Mi'ayin, that's all the Olam Anivroim, in order that Malchus Atzilas should be able to carry out that tremendous helem of the boirei, of the whole inyan from Gilei Elokus ad Koi into the inyan of Bria Yetzira V'Asiyah, then the Sfiros undergo a different way that they relate, and they feed down into Malchus a different type of shefa from the Sfiros themselves, in order that they should be able to feed into Malchus the koyah to be mahava yesh mi ayin. Now, when I say that they should feed into Malchus the koyah to be mahava yesh mi ayin, that's a little bit overstated, because Malchus BMS has its own koyah to be mahava yesh mi ayin. However, all the inyonim in Malchus are made up from the way it's makabel from the other Sfiros. In other words, that a king is not just somebody who rules, he's got all sorts of different ways that he rules and different functions that he uses in order to carry out the support of the subjects in the Medina. In the same way, in order for the Eibush to actually bring about the Olam as Yesh Mi'ayin, there has to be, and there is, a combination of all the different inyanim, like Chesed and Gvura and Tver. All those things are intertwined and involved in the Etzem Koyach HaMalchus, but the Etzem Koyach HaMalchus, in its own individual sense, is the Inu V'Yesh Mi'ayin, but it's called from the Shefa of the Sfiros, which mashpia to it, and that gives the whole what's called binyan hamalchus. We can meet that expression here in a minute. The binyan hamalchus to carry out the actual creation in its fullest sense. So therefore, that interrelation of the spheres in Atzilus amongst themselves to lead down into Malchus for the sake of the Yisavas, not just for the sake of the interrelation in Olam Atzilus itself. Well, that's a different system. I say right, the Alter Rebbe is Maramas it over there in the Loshen. But the Rebbe over there in Samech Tes describes that at some length, that there's a different way that the spheres relate to themselves in order to get down into Malchus, in order to bring about the actual, that they will be also part of the actual Hashpur into the Yesh. And it should be in an even from Yesh Miha Ayin. How does that work? So what he points out over there, Barich is in Bekitza, the Nakuda is like this. That we've seen that every Ilav Olul is a Ha'ora. The Ilav himself is a Ha'ora. And he gives a ha'ora from himself into the Olul, and then eventually the Olul becomes a Matthias b'fnei Atzmei, and that leads then to another, he becomes a Ila to a further Olul, and I say that's how the whole Seder V'Ishtalshus of Ilav Olul goes. So that interrelationship of one Ilav Olul to give rise to another Ila, which gives rise to another Olul, and that gives rise to another Ila, well, that's all in a way that it's like as if, for example, a mensch was talking, or if I was talking to you guys in an even from Dibu Masuda. In other words, I had a certain hasoga, and I had a certain arousal to give that hasoga further, and then I talk, maybe I talk in an even Masuda, and that's Megala, the Inyonim Harayah, to the Makablim. So one Ila gave forth a Olul, and the Olul became a Matthias b'fnei Atzmei. Kilu is a union of like Dibu, of the union of the Olul to produce another Ila Olul. That's like Oisias. It's like a form of speaking, and those Oisias are the necessary symptom from one Olul to the next Ila, and so on. Like when you talk, you're giving out what you experience, but you have to be mitzamtzum in a certain way. But that's a tzimtzum which is really for the sake of Gila. It's not a tzimtzum which is a helim, gomo, or its inyan is helim. You're just mitzamtzum in order to give over what you're really experiencing. And that goes over in the inyan from Oishia. However, there's another whole form of ashpur in Chassidus which is called Cyrus. Have you ever heard of the whole concept of Cyrus, which means hairs? And we find that where we want to go from one level to another, even from Ein Arich, and we don't want it to be such an open connection from one to the other, where the Makabel is Makabel, a chef of Pnimi, and recognizable in him where he got it from, and he's got the kesher with the Mashpia. So then we go through the inyan of Cyrus. And that's brought down in Ribui Mekaymus in Siddas, Benekeh to the Shefa from Keser into Chochmah, for example, is sometimes described as the Derech Cyrus, and the Yud Gimel Midas Rachamim, what they're from the Indian of Keser, and they're Indian from Rachamim El Yoinim, what they're higher than the Indian from Rachamim El Atilas, or they're called Yud Gimel Tkunei Dikno, they're called like the beard, they're also Indian from Cyrus. And there's different types of Cyrus. There's Cyrus Arosh and Cyrus Azokon, all different vachinas in Chassidus. However, what's the difference between Dibu, Masuda, and Cyrus is that in a hair, if you cut the hair horizontally, you don't even really do it. And it's written in Chassidus, all the hairs really are mushash in the moyach. They really, their shurish is in the moyach. The Cyrus of the head, and also the Zoch. Idachim Kein, the moyach is a very delicate center of feeling. Why don't you feel, when you cut your hair, why don't you feel like Givaldik you should shrei Gival, because that's coming from the moyach. But they say, but there's a story, I don't know if it's true, I heard give size for that. Well, they say about the Rogat Shova Gon, that if he cut his hair, that used to hurt him badly, like just the cutting of the hairs in a normal way. But some people said it's maybe not necessarily the case why he grew his hair. There's all Sforah from the Rebbe that he was a Nazi, and not a whole mass. The Rebbe's got a very strong Kasalkataita. The Rogachover was a Nazi. It's a whole amazing business. Ein kana mochem lahari was that. It's a big masechta. It's a big Indian. If I asked me, it was got kama sipurim be'Inyan. Anyway, let's leave the Rogachover out of it. Maybe he did feel pain. His hairs were cut. I'm not sure about it, but anyway, kacha yesh anashim shereitzim loima. By anashim kerakenu, if they cut your hair, horizontally, you don't feel anything. However, if somebody plucks your hair, wow, then you feel it. In other words, if somebody pulls at your hair, then you feel it. For what? Because then it goes directly to the kesher of the saya in the moyach. If you remember, then you feel a tremendous pain, because it's coming mamish from the mock hair. When it goes out into the saya, into the hair outside, why don't you feel the pain if it's cut or it's affected in any way? Because it's gone through a big hefsek. It's gone through the hefsek of the gulgolas, and it's gone through the etzim symptom of the sayar itself, which is a very tremendous symptom. It takes like the pnimis achayis, it makes it into a very, very small line. In Mamil, both things, both the hefsek and the gulgolas, or the skull bone, and the etzim symptom is so great that you don't really recognize the chayas for what it really is. In other words, even though it is the chayas of the moyach, it's kamat lobe, begolui klau, and it's only after, if somebody does something which is haipach harogah, and actually tries to pluck your hair out, so then you would feel the kesher with the moyach. Avu begolui is a lo nika klau. And that's what is the difference. Where we take from Madregas a Sevi Keser and Pnimis a Keser into Chochma Da'atzilas, then that goes through the Indian from Cyrus, and then it's brought down in many Trushim, in Lakoti Torah and other places, that even certain Madregas in Atzilas have beards. It's brought down that Zohar has a beard, and other Inyanim. Kaviohu, inside Atzilas, that there's Amshocha, which is like a form of Cyrus. So that's what the Rebbe says over there in some way. But that Indian of Cyrus is not what the Alter Rebbe says at the beginning of Iyu V'Chayehu. But there the whole Indian is Ili V'Orol, albeit in what's called an Orthodox even of Ili V'Orol, a moving way of Ili V'Orol, even though Yesh L'Falfa was there. It's not so simple. For the purpose of our Indian, it is. Because in Ili V'Orol itself, there are two different ways you can be masbeh Ili V'Orol. And it seems to me over there in the Geras HaKodesh that there's an emphasis on another idea in the Rivol as well. It's very difficult, really, ultimately, to know. However, what he's saying here is that when the spheres are relating one to the other, because they want to eventually get into Malchus in order to give Malchus the credit. Now, when I say give Malchus, to fill up Malchus in a way that it'll be ready to carry out the Hishavas Yesh Mi'ayin Mamish, or then the spheres interrelate in a different way. They're not in even an all orthodox, but they relate one to the other direct-sided, which is also a form of Ilivol. It's also a very difficult form of Ilivol, but it's also a form. And then, literally, we say that even certain of the Moichin can have beards, and they give forth Hamshocha from the Moichin into Midas, and then we say that Zohar for sure has a bit, because Zohar goes down into nature Vahoyid, and through that into Malchus, of instead of going just through the symptom of Dibur, like passage of one thing to another, it goes through the union of Cyrus. So this whole concept of a symptom, which albeit has the same mocked, but it's so hidden and it's so not nikah that it's almost impossible to see the kesher with the shoirish. Just like when you look at your hair, you don't see the kesher with the moyach, and even when you cut you or you play around with it, if you happen to just play with your hairs or touch them, you don't feel any shaykh's cloud to the Indian of the moyach. Only in a very unusual and harsh way would there be any gilui of the moyach in the siders. What do we mean? That's also called, the truth is, that's also called sometimes ilava ola, because it's not mamish yesh mi'ayin. But it's a different form altogether of interrelationship of the spheres, which is hardly korev yeser el yesh me'ayin than it is normal ilava olo. So that's what the Rebbe means, that the whole inyan which prepares for yesh me'ayin, which begins with Malchus D'Atzilus, that's where the whole yesh me'ayin really occurs. Even the preparation inside Olam Atzilus itself is not in a oifen for normal Ilah Va'ol, but it's also yetzim me'agedesh a little Va'ol, and it's korav yezel yesh me'ayin, even amongst the spheres themselves. How can you have yesh me'ayin amongst the spheres themselves? Oh, that's inyan from Cyrus. But that's what he's mad over there, ganze Ariches. And he connected with a whole big bureau over there in Reish Samech. It's a huge, I won't say huge, I mean it's a big arichas of several pages over there in Samech. But that's a Nakuda Sa'inin. He connected with Daimim and Sameach and Ruchnias and all sorts of amazing, you know. So that's, it's well known. I heard from one of the big Hasidim that brackets in the Rebbe Rashab Zamaima you have to spend a tremendous amount of time trying to understand it. So since it was written in brackets, then that's why we had to spend a bit of time at it. But I heard from one of the Siddim that wherever you meet the brackets, then you got to just drop all your concept of time, and you got to spend time in inverted commas trying to figure what is it really all about.
Why is there change in how the spheres react with each other? What's the advantage or the difference?
Because otherwise you wouldn't get to the connection with Malchus. It would produce yesh me'ayin. They would feed into Malchus in such a way that Malchus would be not functioning in a even that it would be able to use them to bring over them into the infinite yesh me'ayin. In order for there to be a shaykhus and a kesher with yesh me'ayin, they have to function in a way which is similar to yesh me'ayin. They have to feed into Malchus in such a way that they'll be part of the yesh me'ayin process. If they go the way they do a mavur over there at the beginning of Iyuv Chayev, they function just in a way from Ilah Va'ol Orthodox. Even though, as I pointed out, yesh lefalfel is over there, if it really is as Orthodox as it sounds. But for our purposes, that's an akuda. V'chein says the Rebbe, b'klolis hisavas ha'olamas, that we were talking about the Asara Mamores and the interrelationships of the spheres, how they are in Atzilus, but in the general concept of the whole hisavas of the olamas, the whole concept of the bringing about of the creation of the worlds, shahoyo alidei tzimtzum ha-rishain. We mentioned briefly a Masechta, which is probably one of the longest Masechtas in the whole Chassidus, the Tzimtzum HaRishain. Now when we mean the Tzimtzum HaRishain, we mean the very first Tzimtzum which occurred in the Eirin Tzev, after the Gilui of the Eirin Tzev from the Moya HaAtzmi, from the Atzmi Ein Tzev, and Kemuver, right at the beginning of the Eitz Chaim, of the Arizal, what he says over there, that there was a Oyer Elim Poshut, which was Mamalius, Kolamatzius, Ha'ilamas, and that was Meir Atzmas, and between there was this Tzimtzum HaRishain. So the Tzimtzum HaRishain, the Inyan HaTzimtzum Yadua Shehu Bechinas Histalchus V'Histalmas Oyer HaRishain Legamre. Well known, and this is the famous doctrine of the Tzimtzum, that originally the oil was Meir after the Tzimtzum, after the Iskalus Mi'atmas, and then Kavayocho, the Eibishter took it all away completely. In other words, the Tzimtzum HaRishain is different than all the other Tzimtzumim, Hamavuarim, B'chsidus, all the way down through Seidish Tausus, Oilamas, and all the way through even Oilamas Biyah, even in the Oilamas Yesh Mi'ayin. All the Tzimtzumim are somewhat relative. They're like Miyutim, or the Shinuim, or reductions, or sometimes they're almost for a stadium, but they all let through the oil Kamosha Hoyo, but in a different form, in a different intense form, etc. All the Tzimtzumim, B'chol HaMadreges, Reish Kol Dargin, and Sof Kol Dargin have different oifanim in them, but they're never ayin of taking everything away and leaving as it were, a vacuum. It's only the first Tzimtzum that in Yonah was complete removal and histalkus of the of the and that's what he says now. The inyan atzimtzum yodua shehu b'chinas histalkes v'his almas oyer harishon legamri. In other words, that histalkes is in such a way that it was his almas. In other words, it wasn't begilui at all. Because sometimes the word histalkes can imply like going into a higher madrega, of maybe there's still some gilui or shefa nimshach mizeh. When you say histalkes v'his almas, then you mean that it got out of the area. It literally retreated or withdrew altogether.
Did Adam HaRishon have exposure to the Did Adam HaRishon have exposure to the first light before the faith?
Yes, he did in some ways. Yeah, before the Chait, yeah, you're right. You were medactic to say before the Chait. I'm not sure if we can say he had a gira the mamishal was created matzimtzum. Avol upon him in oiros which are lamaila me oilamas and oiros which are lamaila me atzilus, that he did it, because we say that he was mabit misayfa oilamad ad seifei. So Chassidus says it was at the beginning of Seif Oilam ad Seifei. It means from Seif, one madrega in Elokus all the way down to a much lower madrega. So in the first Seif, or the first Ketzei that he had, was a very high madrega. Mesupek ani, if it was mamish in the Earl of Tzimtzum, I will korev lezeh. Me ain't. And the fact says the Rebbe that there was a stalkes in the form of a salmas. It was a complete withdrawal. Stalkes v'salmas harishon legamri ad shenisho cholol mokom panui, until there was left literally a cholol, means that it got a cavity like an empty space. Mokim panui is the way of saying in Lashon Kodesh a vacuum. In other words, a complete emptiness, nothing there. That's the way of saying a vacuum. Makom panui. Bechinas heder ha'ir v'al gilu legamri, completely an utter absence. Heder is absence of the earth, v'gilu legamri. Benimshach achachach, and afterwards into that cholol and into that mokum ponoi, there was nimshach afterward the bechina of the kav. Well, it's one on that the kav is already a line. The word kav means a line. In other words, it was mitzumtam in such a way that it can be described already as a recognizable line, as you might call it, a dover. What is possible to describe it in its oifen of gilui, mashakin, something which is mamish ain't safe, you can't describe it in any way, or you can't say that it's nimsha in a way of what we call maila u mata, having higher madregas and lower madregas. Mashakin, the idea of a kav is that it's going in a certain line, it's going in a certain direction, which implies that ultimately it will lead to higher levels and lower levels. Well, that was nimshach achara b'chinas akav liyoish moker loak. It became a moker to the inyan of Adam Kadmon. Now I've said that and I don't intend saying it anymore, because according to Chassidus, that's a Shem Kodesh. The expression is a Shem. Therefore, it's always brought in Chassidus ak. It's not nohug by the Chassidim to say the whole time Adam Kadmon. You only say ak. I say that's the minhag. He said there's nimta afterwards the kav, and the kav's inyan is to be a mocker to the inyan of ak, the b'chinas Adam de bria de klolus, v'liyais isavas haneh tzolim, and that there should be the coming into being of the Ner Tzolim. Now, Ner Tzolim means the spheres are prior to Malchus Tatzilus. All the madrigas of the spheres, all the way down from Mark through Akudim and through Toihu into Atzilus, and Ad Malchus Tatzilus, they're called Ner Tzolim, things which are being brought about, literally, or made near, not things which are created. Nivroim means created in Yonim, things which have become Yesh Mi'ayin. Netzalim means things which have just been mishgale from Elikus in a form of Gilui Elikus B'etzem, not Yesh Me'ayin, and Afu became in that Gufa, in order to bring about the first of all those elements, or the first of all those Giluim, the first what you might call Partzuf, not so much a Olam, is Ak, and the two expressions in the word Ak, or in the two words of Ak, imply on the one hand what he says immediately here, the Rebbe Odom, and the other one implies the union of Kadmon. What Kadmon indicates, the concept of primordiality, meaning that even though Ak is the first Gilui after the Tzimtzum, the Etzem is Galus there is still in a way that everything is an Oivim and Ein Sof, and it's almost impossible to be mechalik between that or how was Koidem Tzimtzum and Li Achar Tzimtzum. Poshet mitzad is Galus or Inyonim, but by Pnimis Inyonim there's an unbelievable chilek between the two. And therefore it's called Odom. One hand, on the other hand it's called Kadmon primordial. However, our union, what we're concerned with is that it becomes a union of Odom. Now when you say Odom, then Odom implies the concept of Kaviochel, it implies the concept of a Mensch. It was a Odom. Odom means that you've already got Mantra. If your Mensch is made of, he's got a Rosh, and then he has a heart, and he's got a Guf, and he's got native head, he's got Raglaim, he's got Yadayim, he's all sorts of Madregas Chalukos, what all of them together, albeit make up a Odom, and he's got Kalim, and in the Kalim is Nimshach his Nefesh, the Ine van Oides, and Kalim with the ganze Riches, well that's the Ine van Odom. In other words, that Odom is already indicatory that we've got a whole Seder already, even though in Ak it's not Begolui Mamish, it's all Kolo, but take the of it, it's there, and even that it is ready to be Mizgaleh. It's Kolo in the but it's ready to be Mizgaleh. Mashikin in the if that symptom, in the Vakas. That's a tremendous Hevdil Beinayim. Also from him, says the Rebbe, that from the Tzimtzum and Mokim Ponoi was Mizgaleh de Kav, and it became a Mokim to this union of Ak, and Ak is the union of Odom de Brio de Klolus. Now, that's a little bit of a difficult expression, but we've had it in some of what we had it on a couple of occasions, that there's what's called Ishtaushlos Oilamas B'derech Prat, and then there's Ishtaushlos Oilamas B'Klolus, which means that if we take the union from B'derech Prat, then we say that Atzilus is Olam Atzilus, and then Bria is Olam Bria after the Helm of Malchus, Yesh Me'ayin, and then you got Yitzira and you got Asiyah. But if we talk about Klolus Olamas, then we say that Atzilus is Asiyah. Atzilus is Asiyah in the Klolus of the whole Inyan. Now it is Mia Atzmas. Ve'a'oira Rishon v'kolo Inyanim. So then we say that how do you call it? Atzilus is the Inyan from Asiyah, and then we say that Nikudim and Akudim they're the Inyan from Yetzira, and then we say Ak is Brio, and Atzilus HaKlolus is even the Yoshel Ifnei HaTzimtzum. In dem Gufido Tveim, there's only two dayas two shittas in the Inyan what's Atzilus, the Klolus. The Alter brings in Pasha Masay in Lakutei Torah. He brings over there two shittas, but the one shitta is that Atzilus, the Klolus, is Takel Ifnei HaTzimtzum, the Yoshel Ifnei HaTzimtzum. He brings over there another shitta that between the Tzimtzum Harishon and Ak is like another kilo in the middle of that Klolus Keser of Ak, or that's called Odom Datzilus, the Klolus. Anyway, whatever. For our purposes, we'll say that Odom Datzilus, the Klolus, is the Yoshel Ifnei HaTzimtzum, immediately Ifnei HaTzimtzum. And then we'll say that Odom is Bria de Klolus, Odom de Bria de Klolus is Ak, and Odom de Yetzira de Klolus is Akudim and Nikudim, and Atzilus is Asiyah. I wasn't with Bria, wasn't with the Oilamas on the Roim. They just tack on somewhere. According to that whole calculation, they just sort of get tacked in somehow or another to like a Yesh Me'ayin Atzilus. Or they're almost not next of Kimat. Amamel Lefiseh, Kumtais, that we see that according to that whole shit in Kabbalah, that the elements are divided into klolim, we call Ak Bria. We say Adam de Bria de klolos. What that means that after the Tzimtzum Arishan and after the Gilead, the Kav, Ak is like Yesh Me, is like Yesh Me Ayin. And it's brought down that that's a tremendous and gewaltige Yesh Me Ayin, because it's mamish from the earth, so if now Tzim, the emes of Pshitas of the air ain't safe. And here all of a sudden you get a Ayin, which is called Odom. It's already got potentially all the different madregas in it, and that's a kfitza, a dilug from the union of the Ein Sof, and it's only made possible by the union of the Tzimtzum. And that's called Bria Yesh Me. That's already highest the union for Yesh Me Ayin. And on the contrary, it's mashma in certain places that it's a Yesh Me Ayin Otu, and that the Yesh Me Ayin in low madregas, like that is how do you call it? Almost nothing. Except for the Yesh Me Ayin or the Gashimus in Olam Hazeh, that's already an unrivaled Yesh Me Ayin, as you might say. But everybody, I'm sure, is aware of that. But anyway, whatever, it follows the piece here that the Ach is already called Bria. If that's called Bria, then the Ramban says at the beginning of his Pirush al HaTorah that Ein Lanu Loshen Levati Inyan Yesh Mi Ayin Yosem Mi Inyan Bria. The word Bria is the only Loshen in Loshen Kodesh which can tell you the concept of Yesh Mi Ayin. Therefore he says that the Abish is called Boirei, and that's the Emes, and it's Mavur and Siddhas that that's the Emes, a name for the Abish, even Atzmusa is borrowed. So we have no name for Atzmusa is borrowed, but we call Atzmusa Boirei. For us, the whole concept of Yesh Mi Ayin is hinted in the whole word Bria in Loshen Kodesh. And if I call Bria, then I mean Yesh Mina Ayin. Remember, we see that the beginning of the whole Amshocha, the Kav is really Ach. We'll soon see. But the beginning of the whole thing is from Ach, and that's already called Bria de klolos. In other words, Yesh Mi Ayin legabe the earth lifnei Tzimtzum. That the whole inyan from the Kav inyan was to bring about a inyan shel Yesh Mi Ayin, which means that the whole inyan from the Kav is a ha'ora de'ora bilvad legabe the earth lifnei Tzimtzum. We're not going to go into that now. The intelligent reader says, well, couldn't I have got to all that by Tzimtzumim? Why did I have to take away everything and then bring it back? Well, that's a famous kashia. Why did it have to be in an even from Mokum Panui? Could have made all sorts of a tremendous Tzimtzumim v'ka'itim. So the answers to that kashia are, I wouldn't say there are many, but there are biurim bazer, and Milan Godel, the Rabbeinu Chaim Vital in the Eitz Chaim, he himself asked the kashia, the kashia. Was saying kind of Mokum Lahari, but for our Indian, that's the way it functions. It functions in an even from complete siluk, which means that if I want to get to Yesh Mi Ayin, I had to go an absolute drastic alteration, which leaves me nothing of what I had before. That's the nakuda. If I want to go into from a Ayin into a Yesh, the Ainu, the Din von Ach, which is Bria, with the Din von Yesh, then I have to undergo a complete and utter, as what you might call, withdrawal of everything I know, and I get only a ha'ora de'ora, and kemuvan, that ha'ora de'ora, and the kav, v'balzeh come through this whole inyan of an absolute mokim ponu, and he comes to what's a kvitza of a dilug, legamrei, erevo, he's in an oven ha'ora nivdelas. He's not only a ha'ora, but he's also a ha'ora nivdelas, a separate, as it were, ha'ora, altered, she'ein nika, a keshe shaloi, im ha'etzer. But that's the whole inyan of ha'ora nivdelas. And if I said that's the whole inyan of the kav, and that eventually gives rise to Adam the Bria de klolos, and Leah Ishisavas on Ne'atolim. For the time we want to talk about Ne'atolim. So we see how great is the Ein Arech of the Esther spheres, Datzilas, Afila Lagabi, Ak, Rachas Kama Vakama Lagabi, the Ershel of Nea, Achimta. Rafa, Shekol, who brings Achurayim, Vichitanias Lavod. All this is only that what we said before. Yesha Vavaya Melech Le'elam. The in and the kav is only an Achurayim Vichitanias compared to the original oil. And not only Achurayim Vichitanias, but in that Gufa, but they're a Krita, or they're a Havdolah. The Elavad, the Beginners Malchus, the Ein Seif, Shehu Beginners Ha'ora, de Ha'ora, She'ena Muhus Oyer HaRishon Klal. He said that's a madrega which is called Malchus the Ein Seif. It's Malchus of the Ein Seif. Meaning Ein Seif means the Oyer HaRiz Koydem HaTzimtzum. That's called Malchus the Ein Seif. She'u B'chinas Ha'ora de Ha'ora. It's only a luminescence of a luminescence. She'ena Muhus Oyer HaRishon Klal. It's not Mahus of the original oil at all. Original oil meaning the oil Arishon, the oil Shlifnei Tzimtzum. B'chinas Mahus oil Arishon. Afilu mib'chinas Acharayna Shaboy. Even if we talk about an Acharayna Shaboy, what it's brought down in the Kisvei Arizal that there are hadrogas even in the oil Shlifnei Tzimtzum. There are certain gradations. What we talk about readers in the intensity of the earth, even Lifnei Tzimtzum, even there's also like Ha'oras. Over there, Ha'oras Atzmiyim, they don't really change the Etzem Mahus of the Inyan. So Rebbe says that the Malchus Ein Seif that we mean here is Ene Mahus Rishon Afilu Miprin Acharayna Shaboy, meaning in the gradations of the oil. Lifnei Tzimtzum, there are also certain inyanim which we can talk about a Bechina Acharayna. That's brought down in the Kisvei Arizal that there is a Bechina Acharayna Koydem HaTzimtzum, and that's Mavui and Samech Derech Hagav Bariches. He said if we were talking about that oil Rishon, in other words, the Ershel Lifnei Tzimtzum, there wouldn't have been any possibility for there to be the coming into being of the Olamas. Even the highest Madrega in Olamais, it wouldn't have been possible for there to be their coming into being. And that's why there had to be a complete withdrawal in order that there should be some makir which would be shy to bring about these elements. So if I had that oil Arishan, had that original oil been Meir, Kamoishu, it wouldn't have been shy. Now when we use expressions like that, there's a famous old kasha that David is Kol Yochel, he can do whatever he wants. That means that in the whole Seder that the Eibushter wanted, Mitzad Rotzen, and that's Mavur considered that Mitzad Omnipotence Eibush could have done anything, Mamish. I mean, there could have been any, without any Seder Ishtalshels at all. Now, the Rotzen of the Eibushter was that there should be this whole Indian of Seder Ishtalshel. Inside the whole Seder that we have been revealed by Pneumis Satira, that's what the Eibushter wanted. Inside that, there couldn't be the Yisavas Eilamas if it was from the Arishan Koydem HaTzimtzum. Ki im alidei Tzimtzum davke shenimshech oyer she'ena b'mahus ha'oyer ha'rishon klal. And well, there's a bit of a hint at the whole kasha that we said, why did that have to be the Indian from Siluk oyer lagamri? Because we're trying to, the Rebbe's malam is that the whole Indian has to be another mahus of oyer altogether. And another mahus is the concept of ha'oyer nivdelas, what that's kilo, not pagoli, klal, any keksha with the previous. And therefore, in order to give rise to such a matzah, we had to take everything away and then bring it back. Because that had been any ha'ora of the previous oil, even with the tzimtzum, since it's a meaty sin in a bilti gvul and bilti soft, whatever way you would have left it, it would have been, as it were, mevatel, in a certain way, the whole ha'ora that we're looking for in the kav. That the kav would have been niklo back into its makir, not even from bittul kol ha'matziyah. And therefore that to be the sin from Kvitza Gedola and Elam Goma, which is the infant that Tzimtzum Arisha. And Afar said the Rebbe, that's the Indian which gave rise to Ak. Ach is the first Indian of Yeshmi. So we see it all in even from Aora de Aora, and in that Kufa, even from Aora Niv Delas, but that's Indian at a cow. I'm going to come to Islafis here, that the whole Indian of Yeshmi Ayin is a Tzimtzum Otzum, and that the whole Atzmiyas of the Drake goes into Helem, and that gives rise to a Ha'ora de Ha'ora Bilvad, which makes a child that it should relate to the Yesh, and be able to mislavish in the Yesh without being Mavatal, the whole Matthias of the Yesh. It's a man need, we have to pay careful attention to that expression, Malchus Dein Sei. Well, I'm not going into that now, Barichas, because there's enough on you guys' heads at the moment, Balavochim. Is, or at least that's what I assume. The famous old dictum of the Chassidim, they used to say that Chassid couldn't sleep because he had a kasha and a maimon, a diuk in the difference between them tzimtzum and another tzimtzum. The difference between Lil V'Ol and Yeshmiach Chayid, they had a kasha and the other in Yodim B'Pinim, so he couldn't sleep. Aval will give the rin and Hasheino. So I apologize if we are being maval, you guys sleep, and until we learn these by morning at the night time. So it's Meir B'Tuika Faiz Galas, B'Shas you want to get to sleep. Upon him, just in case you had a diktuk, which doubtless you would if you learned the whole thing carefully, the inner from Malchus staying safe. Well, that expression is a little bit of an interesting nakuda. We look carefully here. He calls Malchus staying safe the after the Tzimtzum Arishan, which is Meir Mahavadin Ivanach. He calls that Malchus staying safe. However, if you look carefully in many places, including the Kisvi Arizal, it would appear that the Shalifnei Tzimtzum, and that we saw B'chin Achreinu Shaboi, well, that's called Malchus staying safe. And the Alter Rebbe brings in that 2 days, like I mentioned, the Alter Rebbe brings in that 2 days in the Kuti Torah. And here the Rebbe is using Malchus staying safe after the Tzimtzum. And we have to say that it appears that immediately after the Tzimtzum, you got Ak. So the truth of the matter is that you don't really. After the Tzimtzum, you have what's called Keseh Shabak. And that Keseh Shabak, that's what's called the Reishis Akav. Well, that's like a whole sort of gilui of oil, which is even too big for Ak, Kaviocho, that has to undergo a certain tzimtzum and gradation even to bring about Ak. Or that whole madrega, well, that's called Kesher Da'ak, and that's a very interesting madrega. Or Atzmiyas Hakav, it's called sometimes Reishis Hakav. I don't want to call it Pnimiyas Hakav, because Pnimiyas Hakav is another idea. There's a whole beer in Chassidus and it's called Pnimiyas Hakav. But anyway, suffice it to say that madrega immediately after the Tzimtzum Arishan, which is the Kesser of Ak itself, well, that is called in many places Malchus staying safe. And some people don't want to call that Malchus staying safe. It appears here that the Rebbe is using that expression. He's saying that after the Tzimtzum already, that's what we call Malchus staying safe. And he says the Ur Arishin, that is calling completely beyond us altogether, and that's the Ur Shalifnei HaTzimtzum. Well, that's just putting it right, just in case. And what does he call that? He calls that a Filo B'chin Achreinu Shaboi. Boy meaning the Ur Shalifnei HaTzimtzum. That's normally, that's what's called Malchus staying safe. And here he just calls it B'chin Achreinu Shaboi, and then he says Malchus staying safe. But Lefi said there's a certain natiyah here to go according to that second shitta, which put there. Well, that's just for the Shleimus Ha'inyan. And if you work out it, then you'll see that that's the case. Edifan, says the Rebbe, Lefi calls here, Zeu says the Rebbe, the Bekof Hei Ba'Elul Nivraho Oilam. That's what we see. This whole amazing lesson which I brought at the beginning. And in the Pirchei the Rebbe Eliezer, that really the Bria began Bekof Hei Ba'Elul. The first day of Bereshis is really Kof Hei Ba'Elul, not Rosh Hashanah. Said the Rebbe, if I was, now it makes very good sense, because the word Kof Hei is the Indian Koi. And what does Koi mean? Koi means like an approximation. How do you call it? Something that's not exact. Then you call it Koi. And the whole shoyers of the Bria, like Gavidi Avish, is something, it's like just a ha'ora, it's not exact. It's not, it's Kavioho, not what really is any gilui of him in a real way. It's just something that he made, but there tzimtzum otzum, a ha'ora de ha'ora from himself. And that was the Rebbe now will understand why that's called Kof Hei Ba'Elul. He said, because Nivro Ha'olam. Yeah, Nivro Ha'olam means creation of the world. Shabrias Ha'olamas Hu Mipchinas Koi Davka. Precisely from the level of Koi. Shehu Mipchinas Demus V'Dimyein Levad. In other words, when you want to just approximate the sun, you say, oh, like that, Koi. Yeah. It's only a Dimyein. It's only like a how do you call it, an image, but it's not really how do they say in the old language, it's not the real McCoy at all. It's not anything at all. It's not a ha'ora of the etzem. What the Urshel of now Tzimtzum is. The Urshel of now Tzimtzum is ha'ora also, but it's a ha'ora in which the etzem is begolo, and therefore it's called ha'ora Achmius. Over there, which comes after the Tzimtzum, is a hora dia hora b'derech avdola with the ganze in. Therefore, it's only a dimion bilvad, and that's called koi. And Mamel come to it's very nice. B'kof hey ba'el koi. In other words, a whole inyan which is only a dimion bilvad. That's the beginning of the bria, and that's coming into bria's vishavas ha'elamus was only that. However, Omnom Inyan Rosh Hashanah Ulam Shebchinas Mohus v'Atzmus Horeh. Wake up old. The Inyan from Rosh Hashanah is that why do we have to wait a whole 6 days before we get to Rosh Hashanah? When we get to the first of Tishrei, well, that is already the Yom HaShishi from Kofei Ba'Elul. Is at the Rebbe said Fabuja, because then you little boy, you're going to be created on the 6th day of Ma'aseh Bereishis. The Odom is going to come into being. So there's going to be an Odom. He's going to come into being on the Yom HaShishi. On the whole Ma'aseh Bereishis, his in him is to turn Koi into Zeh. He's going to be Mamshik, the whole Emes of McCoy. He's going to bring down the whole Shleimus Atmas into the Bria. In other words, everything that went away for the sake of the Bria, he's got to bring it all back. And that's what the Inyan of Rosh Hashanah is. Pidli plus and a man. In other words, not that Rosh Hashanah is just to bring back the world, and just have a world again, and we'll all be balabatim and say, oh, we all doing the world. Now, the Inyan for Rosh Hashanah is we want Moshiach now. The whole Inyan for Rosh Hashanah is the Gilui of an Atmas Ein Seifla. Take a look at all the tefillahs, the whole Rosh Hashanah, you see, Galei, Kveid, Malzin, Alein, over Yeda, Ko, Pau, Kiata, we're going to touch it as we go along here. Everything which came about Paul, the Yesh, that he came about him, he's got to know after, say, Ato. No, the Gonzalini from Rosh Hashanah, the Gilu, Atzmius, Lamata, was a touchless Kolabria. You know, when you come to Rosh Hashanah and you're straying to the air, you're not straying, you want to have a panoza and you want to keep yourself going for the next year. Have a good year, gesundheit. Mashiach will come with Blauach, he'll stop a good year, gesundheit. Aber da ganze Linie von Rosh Hashanah to be Megal, the Pnimis V'Atzmiyas, which was all hidden in the Koi, in the Kav, and all the Inyanim, to bring it all down Begolui in the but why would you have to have the Kav? Because the Elul couldn't come about if there was all those Inyanim Begolui. But once you're in the world, once the Odom is there, he can achieve everything. He can achieve in such a way that the Elul will be able to take even up to Satan. That's why he was put in the world, because he's got to change the world and make it a kli, even for Atzma saying, safe mami. Does it even dira betach toin? Davke. Erfa, omno min in Rosh Hashanah ula hamshich, v'chines mahus v'atzma so'er, v'gam v'chines ha'atzma shalamayla v'chines so'er v'gilu. In other words, mamish atzmuti is one. Hecha afilu from the earth, hecha afilu from where it was a Tzimtzum. In other words, on a Rosh Hashanah, you're going for the real. Come to us at Rosh Hashanah, another musik altogether. It's another idea. Mein selber Giloi. Wir sehen in Binyan Amal, was bei Rosh Hashanah. Lass ihn in Binyan Amal. In other words, the emes of binyan of Malchus, you're not just to be mamshich all the spheres that should be all of them havi yesh me'ayin. Einochanam. Zegam kein chelik me'avin. Because we can have a world. Without a world, we can't have Gilui Atzma. So that's to also be those silence we spoke about before, which will be mamshich into Malchus and make a oilam. Okay, but that's not the whole inyan. The whole inyan is the binyan hamalchus. The emes of binyan is that you megala atzmas ain't safe in Malchus, and that goes over through Malchus. All Malchus is only like a medium to pass atzmas ain't safe into the whole, into the ganze bria. And that's what the whole hemshech of the ganze Siddur is all about. That all the Maimorim in Rosh Hashanah, ultimately that's their message. The Hina Yedua, the Sheresh HaMalchus, Hulamayla Mikol HaSfiras. The Sheresh of Malchus is tremendously high. Yeah, the Sheresh, the original Sheresh of Malchus, meaning Malchus houses, Malchus D'Atzilos. It's got a very, very high root point. Hulamayla Mikol HaSfiras. Kamashkos Beit Chaim. It's brought down in the Eitz Chaim from the Arizal. The Sheresh HaMalchus, whom he Reisha Deloi Yitz Yada. Yeah, the Chassidim used to call it Radalor. That's what they used to call it. Oh, that's Reisha Deloi Yitz Yada. The head which is not to be known. In other words, the what you might call the concealed and the hidden Reish. That Tesfiras, but the other Tesfiras above Malchus, Shorshem Miprinas Arik, they come from Chitanius Akesa. Arik is Chitanius Akesa. Our Sheresh Malchus, who Miprinas Reisha Deloi Yisya. Da. What is that for our purposes? Bechinas Pnimius HaKeser. Or that's the Indian from Pnimius. Arik is Chitanius Akesa. As the well known, Arik Ampin. But Pnimius Akesa is Atik, and in Atik Kufa, the Reisha Dibba Atik is also, when we explain that a little bit more, that's the Indian from Pnimius HaKeser. Ubashur Sharishin, that's only how it is in Gilui HaInyonim. Pnimis HaKeser Gora Gewaldige Madrege. Obviously, it's only a certain Iskalas. But the Shur Sharishin, he Mushreshes, Malchus Mushresh, but he the Pnimis fi Atzmas ain't safe. Gemoish Kosu B'mokim Acher. That the Shur Malchus is Mamish in Atzmas. Gewalt. That's what you say. On Rosh Hashanah Melech HaKodesh. And every day you're a little bit maramas to it. At the end of Psuchi Dezimah you say Melech Yochid Chei Lomi. Was according to certain Biurim and Siddur. The Indian from Melech Yochid, or that's the Sheresh HaMalchus in Yochid. Mamish Yochid, not Echad, no Yochid. In the Eivshter how he is the one and only Matthias, and ein Oid Mil. Vade Lagamre taught in the Sheresh Atzmi of Malchus. But we'll see about that more in the future and coming and developing episodes now. But we'll see. Praise Hashem.
So on Rosh Hashanah.
Huh?
So on Rosh Hashanah, the year is always the world is always 6 days older.
Yeah, on Rosh Hashanah the world's only 6 days old. The world's only, as they say in Yiddish, an alter Zach, an alter Meiser. The actual creation on Rosh Hashanah, the actual creation, so they, how do they say, alternayas. It's old news. It's old news. The new news is you, my boy. The new news that you came about on the Yom Tov, the mensch.
Okay, so that's good for me. But what
it's good for you. Nobody's talking about you at all. Now you forgot.